we're going to talk about the real reason why Ravnica is the best set ever made for Magic.
Like you said before we started recording, you've had this written down as a video idea for possibly since we started doing videos. We keep finding reasons why Ravnica is so great, and it just feels like that much bigger of a task to do.
Right.
But that's why we're going to talk about, I think, the primary reason.
Right. We will get to the primary reason. We will get there. But let's talk about some of the other reasons first.
Should we do the YouTube thing where we're like, stick around?
That's what I'm doing.
Oh, shit. Okay, sorry.
God, way to undercut it. Jeez.
I'm not good at being subtle.
So, yeah. Stick around.
Stick around to the end of the video if you want to see the real reason why Ravnica is the greatest Magic the Gathering set. Sponsored by VPN.
Structure makers.
So, Ravnica, was set just after Kamigawa, and it initially, funny enough, was a bottom-up designed set. Bottom-up as in it was mechanically driven, not thematically driven. So the idea of having an entire city or plane filled with all of these guilds that all represent the 2 color combinations of every color, because there's 10 different combinations that you could get all 5 Magic colors in. That wasn't the initial thought. The initial thought was, let's have a set that cares about 2 colors.
Right.
And then it was, I believe, the art director at the time or creative director that came back and was like, let's make it guilds, and each guild has this identity.
So yeah, basically you take any 2 combination of colors in Magic, and then you get a guild from them. Okay. One of the reasons why Ravnica is such a good set, what ends up happening when you combine 2 colors of Magic together is you get a much more complex philosophy, where the colors at their core, I think, are emotions.
Right.
But when you put 2 together, you get a philosophy. You get an ideology. You get a way of existing.
You technically have an ideology with each individual color, but it's much more. It's a much simpler ideology.
Right.
It's very simple. Of just like red is passion, emotion.
Well, and I think what's interesting too is that the color that you're paired with brings out a different aspect of the color, right? So if we look at green and black, right, for instance, with Golgari, green is life, black is death, but it's also ambition. So you end up with, okay, well, green is life and black is ambition. You get using life for your own ambition. You get graveyard stuff. And like, that's not the only way that black and green could have gone. We see that in Strixhaven with Witherbloom, where Witherbloom does a different take on green and black. And so we get sort of different aspects of these colors coming through in that version of green and black.
Right.
Or you look at something like black and white put together, and you end up with Orzhov, right? And Orzhov being sort of if you look at it in sort of D&D-esque ideology, it's sort of like lawful evil, right? Yeah. Where it's almost like a verbatim of black and white, right? Like white lawful, black evil, right? But it's even like more than that, because it's again, black as ambition, right? And white as order, right?
Yeah.
So if you have order and ambition together, you kind of get authoritarianism. And so that's kind of what I mean, is like the colors on their own are sort of baseline emotions. Probably isn't quite the right thing, but it's baseline
ideology. I think is a good way of putting it. You can usually almost always. I love the fact that you can take single Magic colors for sure, but almost always you could take a dual colored Magic thing and associate it with any sort of a TV character that you might see.
Sure, right.
And it almost always will work with someone. You can slot it in.
All right. So color individually, philosophy, 2 colors together, ideology.
Yeah. I think that was the first set to really do that and then associate names to it.
Another reason why Ravnica is the best set ever made in Magic is because of its simplicity. In that before this time, we didn't have like Lightning Helix, I think, is one of the perfect examples of the simplicity that comes out of Ravnica. Yeah. It's that, okay, it costs 1 white and 1 red. It does 3 damage, gains 3 life. That's literally white and red combined. It is the most simple expression of white and red combined. And the Ravnica pays off all of these, right? There's a 2 color or color combination cycle, as far as I know, for every color combination. If there's not, that was a huge miss. But it was like Watch Wolf, right? Which is 1 white, 1 green, 3/3, right?
Right.
At the time, that was a big deal. Now, it'd probably be a 4/4.
And it would have trample, and it would have flying, and everything else.
So we get to do all of this foundational 2-color combination stuff. And this wasn't even the first multicolored set. Like, we go back to, I mean, I don't even know, like Legends or something. Like, way back in the day, there's a multicolored set from way back. There's also Apocalypse. There's another multicolored set. But Ravnica really was, I think, the first set to solidify and do these simple expressions of 2-color combinations and really get the colors to resonate through game mechanics.
I think at that point, I mean, Mark Rosewater had been on Magic for a long time, but I think Ravnica might have been
the first set that he led. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think Mark is obviously he's very good at theme and narrative, coming from a writing background, as he so clearly states.
All the time.
All the time.
We'll never let us forget.
So this being his first set that he led, I think clearly, he cared a lot about attaching that color identity and theming to each of those color combinations and trying to find if there's any sort of connective tissue between those two colors. How would red and blue differ from just red or differ from just blue? Not just in an additive way, like red-white lightning helix, like you're talking about, where it does literally the red thing and the white thing, but also, is there something that red-blue does that is completely different or would only be possible because of the color combination as opposed to them in isolation to one another? An example of what I was just referring to, I could be wrong, but isn't the original Niv Mizzet, isn't it when you draw a card, you deal 1 damage or something like that?
Right.
And that's like, that's essentially, that is the payoff of payoff of red from a function of blue, right?
Yeah.
That's something that you couldn't necessarily have from one or the other, right? There isn't a whole lot of card draw from red.
And it goes even a little deeper than that, in that you're also getting sort of the 2 ideologies expressions in that way, in that is it using knowledge as power, right? So that you're drawing a card is knowledge, dealing damage is power. So here we are. That's like, it's so incredible that these types of cards did not exist until this point.
Yeah.
That most of them are here for the first time, right? That we're getting this baseline, foundational, simple expression of these 2 ideology, or these 2 philosophies coming together in an ideology.
Yeah,
right?
It's kind of crazy because, I mean, Ravnica came out after, what year did Ravnica come out? 2006?
2005.
2005.
October.
And then, so Magic came out in 93. Ravnica came out 2005.
Yeah.
It took 12 years. 12 years they were designing, and they were like, oh, I guess we could finally do 2-color things.
I mean,
like,
there were 2-color things before.
There were 2-color
things
before, but like an entire set that's like, let's now merge these things.
Right.
Now, I think in hindsight, like not in hindsight, but like now where Magic is at, like that seems like almost a given, right? Like it seems so ingrained, I think, in a lot of Magic cards now that I'm sure looking back, if you were a newer player at Ravnica, you'd be like, what's the big deal? Like, I don't get it.
I don't understand why this was so foundational. It's actually really funny. The analogy that I like to use is that there's a movie that's like a train robbery movie from, and you're watching it like, I don't understand. This is kind of whatever movie. And you realize that it's the first movie that has cuts. It's the first time they realized you could like cut somewhere else and then back, and the audience would understand it.
Right.
Before that, it was all just one take, one scene, whatever.
Yeah.
Wild. Right? That's what Ravnica is. So maybe
still not even the real
still not
reason.
even the reason why it's the best set. Okay. So let's get into it.
Okay.
Why Ravnica is the best set.
So the real reason that I think Ravnica is the best set ever is because Magic has always had an identity problem. Right? When you look at other games generally, any IP, it needs some sort of an IP in order to market itself. So most of the time you end up having characters. So nowadays you see planeswalkers. Mm-hmm. Planeswalkers are these things that are commonly advertised, and we see that as a representation of Magic. Magic had a problem with this because the players are the planeswalkers.
But the player is the character.
The player is the character, right. And so there isn't a representation of what that is, right? we talked about like MMOs have like this similar sort of a thing.
Yeah.
And I like World of Warcraft as an example of this, is that World of Warcraft sort of got around this problem because it had factions.
Right.
So it has Horde and it has Alliance.
And it gives players a sense of identity in the world.
Right.
Yeah.
So even if you see generic orc, you can advertise that as you are a member of the Horde, right? And you are associated with that. And there's a feeling associated with picking that faction. Ravnica was the first set that actually felt like you had an association with the colors that you pick. Yeah. Prior to that, you could be a red player, but you didn't have something that really had you identify as a red player.
You didn't have a faction to identify with.
And now there was not only the 5 colors, but now there's 10 factions for you to pick from. Yep. And as we talked about, that it's an ideology. So you get even more specific into what makes a player enjoy their specific experience in Magic, and one of those guilds fulfills that.
Yeah, and I think that this is something that Magic does that a lot of other games do not do in the same way, in that we talk about this a lot as player as protagonist, right? It's that when you're making a game, your player, and Elden Ring is the other example that we bring up a lot about why another game that does this well, is that your player who is playing the game, it's their story, right? You could create a character, an avatar that they control, like Kratos or Nathan Drake in Uncharted, and they could be embodying that character, or the experience your player is having centers them as the beginning of the story. And I'll probably make a different video about this, but I'll touch on it briefly. One of the ways that I think about game design is in line with this thing called the story circle, which is something that Dan Harmon talks about, which it's basically a simplification of the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell, and it kind of removes some of the weirdness of the hero's journey. So basically, you have a circle that if you split it in half, I'm not going to go into the detail other than if you split it in half, on the top of the arc, you have the known, and the bottom of the other half circle is the unknown. And the protagonist moves from the known to the unknown, learns something, and comes back to the known realm having changed somehow. And I perceive this as being foundational to the way that games work, in that you as a player are venturing into the unknown, which is the game, and then you're coming back out of the unknown, having played the game, experienced something, and now you are a changed person. And Magic fits this model perfectly, in that you are the center protagonist, you are moving into the unknown, you are playing the game, you are learning, you are experiencing different things and learning, and you come back the other side. Did I say learning twice? You come back out the other side changed. And Ravnica gives you a means of expressing that change and of expressing that experience through the guild that you identify with. Is that you're saying, this is the way that I choose to experience Magic. This is my story, right? And I experience my story through the lens, through the ideology of this guild.
Right. Prior to that, it was just a sort of a vague philosophy of, this is my particular play pattern, or you know, this is maybe the deck and the meta at this time. But now, I mean, look, we just had Pro Tour not that long ago, and it was Rakdos Vampires, right?
We still call
it. Yeah. Rakdos isn't it's not a Rakdos thing, but we still call it Rakdos. It has stuck as an ideology.
Yeah.
It was the first set to actually give players a specific identity and allegiance to something for their playing, as opposed to, it's not identifying with a specific character or associating with a specific character. It is you, the player, are a representation of this guild.
Yeah.
And that guild is very clearly like a specific philosophy and ideology that you resonate with.
Right. It sort of feels like it gives a second layer on top of the color pie.
Yeah.
In terms of how the mechanics are expressed as an ideology that players identify with.